So before we begin, I just needed to provide you some details about how to obtain one continuing nursing education credit. To successfully complete this program and be awarded one contact hour, you must register for the webinar with an email address, attend at least 50 minutes of the webinar, and complete the online evaluation. A potential conflict of interest occurs when an individual has an opportunity to affect educational content about healthcare products or services of interest with which he or she has a financial relationship. There are no conflicts of interest to disclose for this program. For those who just joined, this is Ashley Leek Bryant, Chair of the Mentor Network Committee. We are pleased to have Mary Ann Berzins join us today to present on leveraging your leadership in the space that you're in. But before she begins, let me provide you with a brief bio about her. Mary Ann Berzins is an Assistant Vice President for Human Resources at the University of Utah, with responsibility for organization and employee development, including leadership development programs for faculty, staff, and postdoctoral fellows. Mary Ann earned a bachelor's degree in history and sociology from the University of Leeds, England, and a master's in business administration from the University of Utah. Mary Ann presents and facilitates workshops in a wide range of settings. Prior to joining the University of Utah, Mary Ann held a number of HR positions in England. We are happy to have her share her knowledge and expertise with us, and we would ask that if you could hold all questions until the end of her presentation. Mary Ann? Hello, Mary Ann, are you on? Laura, are you able to reach out to Mary Ann?
I will contact her right now. She should be able to have speaking ability, but I'm getting confirmation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being patient, and thank you for muting your phones. And at the end, if there are additional questions that you have for Mary Ann, please make sure to unmute your phone so she's aware of those questions.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. Hey, Mary Ann, it's Ashley Bryant.
Hello.
Hello there. There are several people on the call. I've provided them your bio, and so they're ready to hear you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. One of the things that really got me interested in learning more about leadership, and it's going to sound slightly contra to what everything I'm going to say, is that for many, many years, I really never thought about myself being a leader. And if I was really honest and candid with myself, I would have said that I was very, very happy just pootling along, which is a very English word, and pootling means just minding your own business and getting on with your own stuff. And it was really not until I started to get into administrative types of leadership role that I really started to reflect more deeply on what it truly means to be a leader. So this afternoon, what I would like to do is to share with everybody some of my thoughts on leadership. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to explore the context of leadership behaviors. I'm going to share with you some strategies to enhance personal leadership and also to identify some potential mentoring opportunities that are available in each of our spaces. Firstly, let me just set some context. So one of the things that I have really reflected on in the last little while is this space in which leadership actually takes place. And at the individual contributor level, here's where we find ourselves. We are all in this intersection of the organization, the work that we do, and the people that we interact with. And the reality of organization is that we have some things to really consider. One of which is that we have primary affiliations, whether that's a program, whether it's a specialty, whether it is a college, a department, it could be any one of those things. Yet ultimately, every single one of us is a representative of the organization at whatever level. And the second thing in terms of my thought process is that we are all employed in some capacity or engage in some type of work-related activity. And the third component is the people that we work with. Even though on some days we really wish we could do all of our stuff without having to interact with people. And in this space, we are known for the work that we do and the quality of the people interactions that we actually have. So we also get experienced as being organizational representatives of some kind. If we are teachers, clinicians, students, practitioners, there's an internal and an external facing component to everything that we do. And in this space where we find ourselves, in this intersection of these three components, one of the key questions for me, regardless of whether we have a formal leadership role or not, is what do I really want to be known for? What is the reputation that I want to have? What is it about my work that I want to be known for? What is it about the relationships that I have with others and the quality of the people interactions that I want to be known for? And the reality is, and this is something that I don't think anybody ever said explicitly to me when I was starting out in my professional career, is that every single one of us has a professional reputation in this space. This is what we're known for. This is how people experience us. And potentially this is also how people talk about us in terms of the things that we do, the interactions that we have, and how we represent the organization. All of these three components have internal as well as external facing impacts and also interactions. So that's my basic context for how we think about leadership at the individual level. Now, this is not a one-dimensional model in the sense of, at this level, for every single one of us at the individual contributor level, this is where we find ourselves. As we grow in leadership roles, whether we take on broader and deeper roles of organization responsibility, whether we become supervisors, we become administrators, we experience different facets of these three components. If we become supervisors or program leaders or directors, then not only are we responsible for the work that we do individually, we now have oversight of the work that is done by other people. In terms of the people component as a supervisor, we get to experience different facets of people's behaviors, and we also have to engage with them and interact with them in a different capacity. We're now in a supervisory or a program leadership role that we did not have before. And as we take on these broader roles and roles of formal responsibility, we also experience different facets of the organization. I have to connect with parts of the organization that maybe I didn't get exposed to as an individual contributor. So those are these three spaces that I see us all interacting with in some facet of what we do in our daily work. And the other thing for me in terms of this whole discussion around leadership is, how do we really think about leadership? Is leadership associated with positions of authority? Is it around particular roles? And there are individual roles that we have in all of our organizations that we may say that people have leadership by virtue of the role that they occupy and also the position, the authority that goes with those positions. For some of us, leadership may be something that we want to avoid because, we have to take on and think about different things in addition to really delivering our own work. And for some people, leadership is something that we aspire to. I would rather lead than be led. I would rather be able to exert some direction and influence and control and authority rather than have to have somebody tell me what it is that I need to do. And all of these are valid thought processes around how we think about leadership. And for you, maybe one of the self-reflection questions is, as you're in this conversation about leadership, what is it that you're really thinking about it? Where do you really see yourself in terms of mindset? Secondly, in terms of how we think about leadership, we've been talking about leadership competencies for a long time. And competencies for me are the things that people almost expect of us as a given. And the discussion around competencies has been fairly static for a long time. What has really been changing around the whole discussion on leadership is the organization context. One of the things that I think we don't pay enough attention to is the importance and the impact of the organization. Competencies have really, in my mind, stayed somewhat fairly static. What we also have to think about is how we apply competencies in changing organization realities. So as I think about the leadership kind of space, for me, competencies are the things that are almost given. Behaviors are something that maybe we spend less time talking about. And behaviors, in my mind, are particularly important for a couple of reasons. We interact with people, and on the basis of our interactions, people experience our behaviors. We can probably, all of us, think about a person that we've either had a great experience with and also people who we've had a less great experience with. And when we analyze what it is that we really would describe as being a great or less than great experience, we come to those conclusions based principally on the behaviors that we experience and potentially the behaviors that others experience in us. So as a consequence of those behavioral things that we do, not only are we forming judgments and opinions about the effectiveness of other people, they're also doing the same about us. And leadership, in my mind, is also an activity. And it's not just a single activity, it's a series of activities that we engage in, one, to demonstrate competencies and the things that people expect us to do in our professional roles, and it's also about the behavioral choices that we make in the engagement and fulfillment of those activities. And these things are interrelated in my mind. So for me, as I think about leadership, I think about these three things. What is the work of leadership, the activities that we engage in? What are the behaviors that we actually are demonstrating? And thirdly, what are the competencies that I am expected to demonstrate in the role that I have? So I put them together in this particular way. So these three components stay the same: organization, work, and people. And I am in this intersection of the three. And the final thing is really about saying leadership is a combination of both competencies and behaviors, with competencies being the given. The behaviors are the choices and the things that we choose to do and not do in the activities that really show the demonstration of competence. So that's how I really put it together in terms of the interaction of those particular things. One of the things that also for me that's hugely critical in the discussion about leadership is the relationships that we have. And we have relationships at a number of levels. We have relationships around the work that we do, how do I really relate to my body of work? How do I think about it? What is it that really energizes me to do this work? And what is it that I really want to be stellar in? We also have a relationship with the organization that we find ourselves in. And I don't know about you, sometimes I get ticked, not just with the work that I do, but also the organization in terms of some of the things that really surround how work is done, how organizations decide some of these things, which on some days really impacts my relationship with both of those things. I also have a ton of relationships with people in the organization that I find myself in and that you find yourselves in. People not just at my co-worker level. These are patients, these are students, these are co-researchers, these are agencies, these are research bodies. There's a ton of them. So in terms of the leadership kind of space, we really have to pay attention to relationship. And the final component for me is our own relationship with our whole concept of life and our lifestyle. Because for many of us, work is a huge component of what we do. It's for many, many people a way that they identify themselves and how they affiliate in terms of their value and their contribution. Yet work is one component of a bigger concept of life. And how do we really engage with the things outside of work as well as the things in work? How do we align our professional selves with some bigger things that are hugely important to us? Family, organizations in terms of some higher purpose, voluntary organizations, whatever it is, our lifestyle. So these are the relationships that we have at multiple levels. The reality is for some of what we do, we cannot not engage in relationships. There are very few things that we actually do that don't involve a people component. And a people component, if it's really a central thread of what we do, really means that we have to pay attention to relationships. There's one thing, building a relationship. It requires a ton of effort, as some of you will have experienced, to maintain and sustain relationships. And yet this is one of the real key activities in the work of leadership, in my particular opinion, around this. So what does it really mean in terms of thinking about the things that are important to us in terms of leadership? If you accept that leadership is a series of activities and it could also be a role within an organization, then one of the key requirements in leadership is to truly understand the organization context. What is it internally and externally that drives your organization to do what it does in the way that it does it at a particular moment in time? And the reality of an organization is that an organization does not exist in a vacuum. So there are external things which shape a lot of what we do. Demographics, federal requirements, compliance. It also could have kind of healthcare changes, policy, legislation, patient needs, student needs, federal funding. A whole ton of things influence externally what an organization does today, as well as what it may be thinking about doing in the future. Internally, there are also a number of organization drivers. Priorities, mission, vision, goals, internal processes, procedures, culture. And so these two things come together in a way that sometimes feels as though there are really fixed boundaries between the external and the internal. And the reality is the boundaries of organizations are not fixed in the way that we sometimes would like them to be. They're very permeable. And in this space of truly understanding what it means to be a leader, I think we have to understand what both of these contexts are actually telling us, which means that we have to pay attention to both. And one of my favorite analogies comes from Rosa Beth Moss Cantor, who describes understanding organizations as very similar to actually watching a kaleidoscope. Every time you turn a kaleidoscope, some component is changing. The configuration changes. It might be a nuance in color, it might be shapes moving into different spaces. And that's the reality of our organizational spaces. It feels like something is changing all of the time in the space that we are in. Now, I don't know about you. I don't have the capacity to pay attention to every single thing that is changing. What I do is do periodic check-ins to truly understand what's in the external landscape. And I also pay attention to what's happening internally. And if you think about organizations, one of the most common analogies is that organizations are like systems. And they are sometimes described as ecosystems, that if you think about an organization as a tree, which is often one of the common analogies that is drawn, that you will see that trees are affected by external things as well as internal things that are happening in the root systems. And I think that's potentially quite a useful analogy. You have to pay attention to both. And part of being thinking about organizations as systems is to recognize that things that happen in one part of an organization impact what is happening in another part of the organization, although the impact may not always be known at the time. Internally in organizations, what we also have are a whole ton of priorities. On some days, it feels like there's too many priorities, and it can be exhausting. However, if we really truly want to be effective in the leadership space, we do have to have clarity of sightline, as I call it, with understanding what are the priorities that truly impact what I do and how I do it. If I sat down and thought about all of the outcomes that I am expected to deliver in my particular role, could I identify how they align strategically with the priorities that the organization sets? And for me, that's the totality of really understanding organizations, that they are internally driven as well as externally driven. There are some internal drivers that shape what we do and really inform some of the priorities. The priorities for me are also linked to the second bullet that's on this particular slide, which is about outcomes. One of the things that maybe we are focusing a lot on is activities. And I would like us to really think about, could we take a step away from that and really focus on outcomes? I think sometimes our tendency to want to focus on tasks and things to do is that it gives us a to-do list. And some of us like to-do lists. We can tick things off. We can actually work on revising our lists. We have lists that we carry forward from week to week of things to do. And tasks feel like doing work. One of the things in terms of this space, which I think is potentially a differentiator, and we also do this because many of you work in, as I do, outcomes-driven organizations. And for me, one of the real turning points in my own thought process is to really get clear about my outcomes before I can determine my tasks. Because on occasions, I get stuck in the task and I can lose sight of the outcomes. And what I'm trying to be way more disciplined about is how I align my outcomes with the organization priorities. And the reality of outcomes is that I cannot deliver some of my outcomes by myself. There are some things which I am very clearly accountable for delivering myself. There are very clearly other things that I cannot do by myself, which talks to two things. Am I clear about the outcomes that I have to deliver with other people, and what does that look like? That also backs into the whole discussion about relationships. How do we develop a relationship with others around shared thinking about the outcomes that we have to deliver and also what it will look like to be successful? One of the things that I think from time to time we all experience is organization frustration. It feels like I'm working really, really hard. I'm pedaling forwards, backwards, and doing all of these things, yet it doesn't seem to be generating success. One of the great insights that I have experienced in my own professional life is when I truly do encounter this level of frustration, on occasions it's really because I'm not clear about what success looks like. And I've also experienced this when working with others. So I've learned to take a pause and really kind of ask myself the question, am I clear about the outcome? And if I do deliver this outcome, how will I know what success looks like? And I've used this, as I said, not just around my own individual outcomes, also the outcomes that I deliver with other people. And that's been really helpful for me to really have that clarity around deliverables. Secondly, the thing that I have also mentioned a couple of times already is pay attention to relationships. What are the internal relationships that are truly key to me in delivering the outcomes that I have to deliver? Not just with others, but also myself. What are those connections that I have to make? What are the key external relationships that I also have to pay attention to? Federal agencies, accrediting bodies, whoever they may be, patient organizations, students, whoever. And in those relationships, one of the things that I will offer to everybody is to reflect on my own willingness to engage and invite perspectives from others. One of the things that I don't think I have paid enough attention to in earlier parts of my career is recognizing that I do not have to be the sole authority on everything. I, on occasions, don't like to process initial thoughts and ideas, potentially with other people. I do a lot of processing internally. And I've recognized that that may not always get me to effective outcomes or to success in the way that I would like to do this. And so for me, my willingness, and it's not come without some disciplined practice, to really invite people to comment on my own thought process, to engage in conversations about how we might do things, has really personally enhanced for me my problem solving and also my collaboration. In my self-reflective, internal way of processing, I think I have stuck for some time in internal problem solving because, after all, I am the most sensible person to have a conversation with. And whilst that may be okay for some things, it is not okay for others. So really disciplined and practice in terms of engaging and being willing to invite perspectives for me has been truly influential in terms of how I've thought about things, how I've really approached collaboration. Engaging and being willing to invite other perspectives means that we have to do something else, which is really pay attention to listening. And listening is one of those tools for me that I think is a huge source of intelligence that sometimes we undervalue. In this conversational space that we create through inviting perspectives, we learn so many things. We learn so many things about our own thought processes, as well as learning so many things about how other people think about the same types of issues that we're all commonly engaged with. So for me, this whole willingness to invite other perspectives can be hugely influential in terms of your collaborative style and also your problem style, as well as enhancing professional relationships in the organizations that we find ourselves in. So how do we actually do all of these things? Because we are not without other things to do. This is a busy space for us all, and I don't hear anybody say, or not many people, that they don't have enough to do in the daily work that they do. I am also, I think, at a point where I sometimes will regard enhancing leadership as yet another thing to do. So I have tried to integrate how I might enhance leadership in a couple of ways that really happen in the workplace as opposed to having to do a ton of external things. The external things which I think might be helpful to many people in very, very different ways, although they don't all have to be done at the same time, is to take advantage of participating in formal leadership programs offered by professional associations, of which there are many. I'm a great believer in taking advantage of free events or low-cost events. The things that I could actually engage in that would be not huge chunks of time, yet would give me some different things to think about and engage in. And there's many things that happen at local levels through chambers of commerce, through local associations that really have minimal or low cost. We don't have to attend all of them. I'm pretty selective about the ones that I go to. When I go to my own professional associations and conferences, what I do is try to go to at least one talk or presentation which is outside my own discipline. And I use that for a couple of reasons. One, to re-energize my thought process, and also really expand my thought process about, are there other concepts or ideas in an associated or sometimes completely differentiated talk that I go to that might provide me with a different way to think about my own discipline. I'm also personally a great believer of leveraging experience that we have in a huge ton of other spaces like PTAs, volunteer organizations, boards, and there's many, many of them. And in some particular spaces, it may be helpful to enlist the help of a coach, although coaches can be expensive. And if you are going to enlist the help of a coach, my suggestion to you would be very specific about what it is that you are actually looking for in terms of help for a coach, because otherwise you could find yourself expanding the time to talk about some things that maybe are interesting but are not always aligned to what it is that you actually need. All of these are things that maybe would be helpful to you to consider this at some point in the future. One other thing that is also, I think, important in the leadership programs that people participate, again, in professional associations, is to understand what it is you want to get out of participation in a leadership program. And where does this fit in terms of the space that you are in now and also the space that you want to be in at some point in the future. Internally, there are some things that I think we can do which are really available to us in very different ways in terms of the organization that we find ourselves in. And this, for me, is what I call the everyday stuff of organization life. Some of you engage in both formal and informal reviews of performance, and while we don't always look forward to these, for me, I'm starting to really think about them as gifts in a funny sort of way. Gifts in the sense of they can be helpful. They may be able to give me some insights that I did not have by myself. In some organizations where we don't do consistent performance reviews, then it might be an area where it would be something that you would have to initiate yourself. So to solicit feedback. I've worked in organizations that were not really very robust in terms of formal performance reviews. And whilst no news is good news on some things, it may not be what would be helpful to you to enhance your leadership space. So I got to the point where I used to solicit feedback from people that I worked with. And I would do this with people that I trusted, people who I knew would be candid in their feedback to me. So in the absence of formal feedback, at least I had some reference points to be able to determine how I was really doing in some of these spaces, both collaboratively and individually in the work that I was doing. Sometimes organizations offer something which is called a 360 feedback process. And for those of you who have never participated in a 360 feedback process, this is an opportunity for you to assess yourself against a number of particular job competencies. You would get feedback from your administrative supervisor, you get feedback from peers, and you also get feedback from people who you may supervise in your particular work organizations. And so that gives you some different points of reference to be able to determine in the feedback that people share with you, are there common things that are coming out in the feedback that I may have to pay attention to you. Some of your organizations will also offer internal professional development opportunities, sometimes at no cost, and again, sometimes at minimal cost, which are provided and borne by the organization itself. So again, I'm pretty selective about those. I really kind of view these as, is this something that I need to enhance? Is it something critical that I really need to know about? I don't sign up for everything. I do pay attention to key internal communications. How does the organization communicate the things that are important? Whether that's through a weekly email, a regular newsletter, a quarterly publication, I do pay attention to that because for me that gives a barometer of how the organization views its current state and also some indicators of things that may be coming along in the future. One of the things for me that is hugely influential is that I do pay attention to how leaders communicate organization priorities. I pay attention to the language that they use. I pay attention to the context that they provide. And sometimes you will have organization leaders that are very good at telling you about the priorities and sometimes light on the context. And a key question that you may want to ask, if it's appropriate to ask in the context this is being communicated, is to ask a leader to share the context of what is driving the organization priority. Is it an external driver? Is it something to do with how the organization is viewed amongst a peer group? Is it because this is where a market segment is being enhanced or growing towards? And I think the context is something that helps me to anchor the priorities. And together with how often leaders talk about these priorities, it also drives a sense of the urgency in terms of how they view it and possibly how they anticipate that we'll pay time and attention to it. A couple of other things that I'd like to share with you is get clear about your own purpose. And this is my relationship with my work. How do I really think about my work connecting with my interests and my own personal goals? Sometimes the work that I really like to do, the work that I enjoy doing, is the fun stuff. And I think we all like to have some fun and need some fun in the work that I do. Sometimes I think I'm a little distracted by the things that I really enjoy doing and like doing and forget my connectivity with the organization's goals. So when I do this alignment piece in my own thought process, I do like to think about, so when I'm looking at the work that I have to do and my outcomes, how does it align with the organization priorities? Because that helps me to do two things. One, get clear about the sight line, and also to understand where I potentially ought to spend more time on making sure that I do deliver goals which are aligned to organization priorities. And what are my strengths? What are my passions? And the things that I kind of think about in terms of my purpose is how do I connect all of those together in a way that enables me to deliver outcomes, have some fun, and play to my strengths and passions. And there have been moments in my professional life where I think I've focused not too much on my strengths and my passions, and it's not always been fulfilling for me. So if there are not many opportunities for you to play to your passions, particularly the things that really, really energize us, then there has to be a space for that somewhere in this fourth dimension of life. Is it in volunteer work? Is it something that I do by way of leisure interest or hobby or family or friends, whatever it is? And for me, this is also the piece around passion and strength, that not all of our strengths may be present in a workplace, yet how do I really connect them to this bigger concept of life? Another thing that I will share with everybody, which again relates to our willingness to engage with other people's perspectives, is to challenge our own perspective. And I think we can do this at a local level without making it too obvious. I sometimes will do this little game with myself where I pick a topic which I might have some particularly strong feelings about. And then I articulate to myself, how do I really think about this topic? And then I do what I call is an intellectual pause. Is there a different way to think about this topic? And it's almost like a debating technique. I will take a contrary view. And I try and make myself stay in the contrary view for some time until I really get to exhausting my thought process about that. And I found that's really helped me to challenge some of my default thinking styles around some things where I just gravitate to them because that's the way that I've always thought about it. I also expand and challenge my own thought process by occasionally picking up books, publications, blogs and articles that I would not normally default to. And again, it's a little like going to a conference or professional association talk, which is outside of my own discipline. And one example, there's a particular, I read a particular magazine every single week, and I've read it for years, and it's almost become reading wallpaper. So I'm trying to actually read a different publication just so I get a different perspective around some common issues. I find myself doing the same thing, and I could be one of the very few people who are still doing this, which is listen to the radio in the car. And when occasionally I hear things on the radio that trigger me, I sometimes find myself really being a little unkind maybe in terms of how I interact with the material. And I'm practicing the same thing. I'm practicing something called stilling my thought. And stilling my thought is not jumping to my intuitive response. So I'm paying attention to how the person presents their discussion and their article and their kind of thought process. And then I think, okay, supposing this was valid, how would I really engage with this as a valid way of thinking? Which also suggests that maybe if I'm using the word valid too much, I'm really kind of saying it's not valid. So I'm trying not to go to the word of valid and just saying, what is it about this particular perspective that could have some elements of things that I could take away from it that would help me to shape my thought process. And I do like to ask colleagues how they think about topics that we are working on. And I like the thinking question as opposed to the feeling question, because I think the thought process really gives us some insights into the thoughts behind some of the behaviors. And so and for me, talking about feelings takes me into a squirrely space that I'm really not sure I want to go into. So my preference is really to stay into the thought process. So those are some of the things that I've been doing and practicing for a little while around how I might challenge my own perspective and how I think about myself without it taking up a ton of time and money. Communication, particularly in relationships, is really, really important. You cannot not communicate. And communication could be a whole host of ways. Email, written reports, presentations, in-person conversations, and dialogue in group settings. And one of the real impacts around really having people knowing what we're doing and what we're delivering is maybe us underestimating the amount of communication that we have to pay attention to. How do I talk about my work? How do I talk about my work in progress? And then how do I really pay attention to the interpersonal professional communication skills, particularly listening. And one of the things that you could do is conduct what I call an 180-degree communication assessment. You can, I ask people and pick people again who are people who know you well, people whose opinion that you value, and ask them the question, what is it like to communicate with me? What's it like to listen to me? And when I am communicating well and when I am listening well, what does that look like? And everybody likes to be asked for advice and coaching. And a question that you could usefully ask some of the people who you may request participate in some of these discussions with you is to say, okay, if you were my coach, what would you suggest I do differently to enhance my communication or enhance my listening? And people, I think, are pretty willing to actually share that with you. One other thing which is hugely important is recognizing that in our professional environments, we occupy multiple roles. Some of those are work roles. Some of those are roles that we take up in very different settings. So we all have a formal job role. We also have informal roles that we take up. So for me, one of the things that I know is that in some of the meetings that I'm in, some of the collaborative spaces that I'm in, I am often the person who will do the summarizing. I'll keep people on track. I will do the summarizing, and I will kind of ask people the follow-up questions to keep us on track. So I know that I get into that role a lot. It's not a role that's assigned to me. It's a role that's somewhat quasi-informal, yet it's a role that I find myself experiencing a lot. There are some roles that maybe I don't have some experience in. And what are those roles that I really do need experience in if they are critical to something that I am thinking about in the future? And how do I really get some experience in these roles? One of the things that I've done with one group that I'm working on is that I tend to informally adopt the process type role. And another person in my group really needs to work on process. So we've had an informal conversation where I'm going to do less of the process work, and the other person is going to actually take up more of the process step work so that we can complement each other. I'm going to think about how might I ask some different types of questions to get clear about outcomes, and this other person will actually take up the process role. So those are the things that I think we can do informally with each other in the different spaces that we are in. One of the things that's hard to do is do this one. Drive your own leadership development, because sometimes if you are waiting for somebody else to do this for you, you could be waiting a long time. And there are some self-reflection questions that you may have to ask yourself in order to get to some clarity of what this might look like. What future roles do I really see myself in? Are these positional roles? Are they roles related to collaborative groups that I'm in? Are they roles related to things that I would like to get more experience in? And what are the key competencies and behaviors that are necessary for success? Do I know what I need to work on now so that when the opportunity arises, I'm ready? Because one of the things that we have learned, I think, in very, very different ways over the years is that opportunities do not always arise at convenient moments, and that we can sometimes talk ourselves out of an opportunity when it arises when we don't expect it because we don't think we're ready. And so part of this is, how do I constantly work on this so that I am ready? Because when you are put into a new positional role and we haven't thought about some of these things that we may need to get ready for, that learning these behaviors and new competencies as well as doing the work can be exhausting. And you can complement this with something called step ahead mentoring. If there is a role that you are thinking about as your next step, is how do I really have a conversation with somebody who's currently in the role to understand what was important, how are the things in the role and the way it's constructed really playing out, what is it that they wish they had known before they took the role. And I think Step Ahead Mentoring is one way we can get some useful insights into roles that we might see ourselves doing in the future. When it comes to mentoring, a key question for us all is how reliant are we on a single mentor? And single mentors who are really excellent are worth their weight in gold. It's just that for really great mentors, the demand outstrips the supply. So one of the things that we're seeing in the mentoring space is to really think about mentors as a network, and maybe having at least 3 mentors. Somebody in my discipline, somebody maybe outside of my discipline, and maybe somebody in a different organization space completely, so that we recognize that we may not actually have to be reliant on one person to meet all of the professional development needs that we have. And for me, this is also about saying that, our career trajectory means that we need things of different types and from different people. So, and it may be a little naive to expect that one mentor will be able to fulfill all the needs that we have. In the mentoring space, and also thinking about future roles, really get clear about what it is that we all need individually. And needs in early career are not necessarily the same as mid or late career. And as you think about how your career is evolving, then who really is it that you have acting as coach and mentor for you in these things that you need? Is it the same person, or could you actually extend that mentor? Here are some thoughts around, for those of you who have never had a mentor that may want a mentor, really get clear about what it is that you need. Look for someone who inspires you and whom you respect. I am a great believer in something called sampling before you commit. And I liken this to going round a store like Whole Foods on a Saturday afternoon when all of these different vendors come with products that you can sample. And you can have a conversation with them about the sample, the food sample, or whatever it is that they are providing to you, the context and everything else, and you get an insight about whether you're going to buy the product or not. And I think we can do this in the mentoring space. Really try and maybe start a conversation around a work-related thing, a topic that you're interested in, and engage the person in the conversation before you commit or ask them to be a mentor. And remember that mentoring does not have to take place in person. There are many, many different forms of mentoring. And don't get offended or derailed if a person says to you, I don't think I have the capacity to be a mentor for you at this moment in time. Ask them for a referral and just say thank you. And the power of referral from somebody else could open the door to other mentors that maybe are not on your radar. So here's what I would like to say in summary, that for every single one of us, we are leaders in the space that we're in, through the knowledge we have, the technical expertise, and the quality of our people interactions. We are all doing a whole range of activities which we may not have the title of formal leadership, because leadership is not just about a formal position. It's also about the activities that we engage in every single day and the behaviors that we demonstrate. Leadership opportunities, particularly formal ones, do not always appear at convenient times. So think ahead about when this opportunity arises, how do I best prepare myself in advance? Be proactive about developing your own leadership and engaging in leadership development activities in work as well as outside of work. And there are many things that we can do in our workspaces to drive our own development. So those are my thoughts for this afternoon. And I will happily take any questions if anybody has them.
The conference has been muted. The conference has been unmuted.
Do we have questions or comments for Marianne?
Yes?
Hey, Marianne, this is Chip from Duke. I just want to thank you on an amazing 50-minute talk on leadership. Everything that you said really resonated with me, and I think you can't stress enough the importance of relationships and understanding the environment you're in. I just want to share with you and the group that when you talk about be proactive in developing your own leadership, one of the things that I had the opportunity to do this semester was to work with a personal coach that the school is supporting. So I've had 2 sessions with her and have, I think, 8 more sessions with her. But just that work with her in 2 sessions has really been transformative in helping me think about leadership. So I really just want to highlight your remarks about, find the stuff that's free. The school's paying for this for me, but there are plenty of opportunities to really get feedback on what you're doing well in the leadership space and where there's opportunities for improvement. So thanks for a really nice talk this afternoon.
You're very welcome, Chip. And one thing, may I just add something to what you said about feedback? One of the things around feedback, which nobody ever tells you, is that, particularly when you do a first 360, is that people focus on written feedback and comments that people make. And what we're really trying to do is work out who said that about us. And I think a more helpful range of feedback is to think about themes in feedback. Have I heard this in different spaces? And if I have, how is it getting in the way of my effectiveness in the way that I need it to be? And if it is, do I have to do something about it today, tomorrow, or I don't view it as important, so I'm not going to do anything. So when you're in the feedback mode, think about themes that you are hearing from feedback.
Great, thank you.
That was definitely important. Another thing, too, Marianne, before we end, I think you made a few points about aligning your outcomes with the organizational priorities.
Yep.
I think sometimes we forget about that the organization has its own mission and vision, and then we have our department. So many of us are in schools of nursing or in some type of department, maybe within a hospital. And so it helps us to think about how do we focus less on activities and more focus on the outcome. And oftentimes our outcome may be appointment, promotion, and tenure. So what do we need to do to get to that outcome, and what leadership abilities are we, could be some areas for growth for us to be able to enhance our leadership skills and be able to meet that outcome. So
yeah, and I think, and Ashley, I have fallen into that trap a number of times, and it is so easy to get subsumed into the tasks that we lose sight of that. And then for me, it's sometimes been a little bit of a shock to the system when somebody says, well, tell me about your outcomes. And I can tell you the 25 things I've been working on, I just haven't connected the dots.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we want to thank you, Marianne, so much again for your time. We want to make sure the attendees complete their program evaluation so we can know what we could do differently or what you enjoyed from this webinar, and for you to get your contact hours as well. So thank you, Marianne, and this is the end of our webinar for today.
Thank you all, and thank you again for inviting me to participate.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.